Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome back to A House Divided, coming to you from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. If it's on our shelves, it's history. My name is Bjorn Skaptesen, and I am your host for today's event on A House Divided. Our author today, we will be discussing the Battle of Spotsylvania with Jeffry D. Wert, and I'm going to introduce you to Jeffry in just a moment. I've been telling folks, Jeff, that we are going to discuss The Heart of Hell, and they can ask questions or order the book by leaving their questions in the comments section of this Facebook feed, and they can order the book by following the link, which will take them to our website, and you can order the book, and we will send you a copy of The Heart of Hell signed on a custom Abraham Lincoln Bookshop book plate by your author, Jeff Wert. Thank you, Jeff, for signing these and sending them to us.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yes. Now, Jeff Wert is an historian and the author of many books about military history, including biographies of George Custer and Jeb Stuart. Civil War Barons is one of his books, The Brotherhood of Valor, The Sword of Lincoln, From Winchester to Cedar Creek, and many other books. But today, we're going to talk about The Heart of Hell, because Jeff Wert has decided to take on part of the Battle of Spotsylvania. And so, Jeff, why don't you tell us about why you wanted to focus in a micro level on one day of the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse?
Very briefly, I was there about 5 years ago. I had been around visiting, and I decided to go there, and was with my wife, and I'm standing there and I'm looking at this ground and I'm saying, there's a good story here. And that automatically, to me, it has to be a good story, something that appeals to me. And when I came back home, and I had written about it, touched upon it in a couple of my books, but never get into it like you would if you really want to concentrate. And I learned that there was only one book on it previously. Now, it's been covered in Gordon Ray's multi-volume work on the Overland Campaign and that, but nobody had really gone into it in detail. And to me, the other contributing factor is I thought the story was so good from the common soldier's point of view, because once I got into it, I realized that you can make an argument that this may have been, at least for the combatants, the worst day in American military history for the men who were there. We're talking men who fought maybe 20 hours, not all of them, but many of them, separated perhaps by the length of a rifle barrel. And they're trapped. And the Confederates, in turn, were trapped. They couldn't not leave. They had to hold that ground until the new defensive line was being built in the rear. So consequently, it's a struggle for about 20 hours. And to me, once I started to get into it and find all these rich comments and quotes and that from the soldiers, I just wanted to do the book. Because I've always thought that when you write a book on the war or any book like this history, in turn, you sort of honor them because you tell their story, and their story needs to be told. And that's what happened with this book.
Right. Okay, I can see that. Now, for me personally, many moons ago, many decades ago, I picked up William Mather's If It Takes All Summer, right. And it was probably my first Civil War battle study, when I was young. And Spotsylvania really grabbed me too. And it was the part of the book that described the mule shoe fight, the fight of May 12th, that really grabbed me emotionally. It was more than a story of military history with maps and decisions by generals. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that you would want to focus that an author like you would want to focus on that day. So you to some extent you already answered this question, but tell me how this is going to be different than a traditional military history study, because you're bringing in so many more voices and focusing about an experience as opposed to a military problem that generals try to solve?
Well, I deal with, you deal with the strategy, you deal with the planning. Francis Barlow said that it was an absurdity that they were going to attack a position they knew nothing about. But once the Second Corps attacked, and then the Sixth Corps, and once Johnson's division was routed, the battle came down, the fight came down to the men in the ranks, regimental leadership, company leadership, but the common soldiers. So in that sense, it's not the traditional in the sense that we go from the top down. This was from the bottom up, almost within perhaps an hour of the opening of the conflict. And it would remain that way. Now, generals would shuttle in new troops on the federal side. Lee would oversee, and Robert Rhodes, counterattacks. But essentially, it came down to that. And that's why it's different. And then there were so many rich voices. If you look at my bibliography, you'll see that I think there's about 170 newspapers in my bibliography, besides the manuscripts. And those newspapers had a lot of information that was never out there before. On the accounts of these soldiers, numbers of them even wrote in May back home to the hometown newspapers, or of course they wrote later on, years later, and remembered it. And it was astonishing. The impact on them was astonishing, because I was telling a friend who was interested in the book, they didn't go there for reunions after the war. This was a place that it was so seared in their memory, and like many of the incidences, and that's why I think it's unusual in the sense that you might think of military. It is military history, but it's really clearly military history from the bottom up primarily.
Right. And we might talk about this a little bit later in our conversation. But yeah, there's something horrifying about this battle that is just this part of this battle that is just different. And it was for them too. That's something you've pointed out in the book. The soldiers themselves thought that this battle was different, and all the battles were horrible.
Oh, yes. There was nothing in their experience. I mean, you're talking the Union Second Corps,
Mm-hmm.
arguably in the Army of the Potomac, their best fighting corps. I mean, they held the ridge at Cemetery Ridge. You can think about it, and what the Wheatfield net, and they, charged at Fredericksburg. And then you have the Army of Northern Virginia, and nothing in their prior experiences for 3 years of war compared to what they were going. It was like because it was relentless. You're going to die looking at or be wounded or survive looking at your enemy face to face. It was the proximity of the fighting, who you're fighting, and the duration, because there was a brief pause late in the afternoon where mistakenly both sides thought there was a truce, but they found out there wasn't a truce, and then it was renewed. That's the only pause, essentially, well past midnight on May the 13th. So that's what separates this. And then the conditions, the rain, the trenches were maybe a foot deep or so in blood and water, and men were piled up on top of each other. And all those things, as I said, I hate to keep repeating it, but seared into their memory of this place. It's horrible. And that's why the title comes from a Confederate veteran, the title of my book. He was taking a man around, a visitor, early 1900s, a man from Ohio, and they got to the bloody angle. And the man said, well, this must have been horrible, bad. And the Confederate veteran said, no, this was the heart of hell. And indeed, I mean, remember, almost all serious Civil War students know about the oak tree, the 22-inch diameter oak tree that was sawed off from the gunfire and artillery fire. And there was another one too. There wasn't just that, but nevertheless, that's the one that's famous. But and as I said, the Confederates were trapped. They had to stay there. Give it up. So you're going to fight for hour on hour on hour. And yes. Well,
I think most of the people that are interested in this book probably already know something about the military history, but let's take a step back and contextualize the Battle of Spotsylvania for just a moment, if you don't mind. What brought Grant's army, Meade's army, and Lee's army together at Spotsylvania in May of 1864?
Well, the Army, Grant had undertaken, it was a massive offensive, if you will, in Georgia, primarily William Sherman. But the main movement, there were two minor movements, on the James River and Shenandoah Valley in the east. But the main one, of course, was the Army of Potomac. And Grant told George Meade that you will go where Lee goes. And on May 4th, 1864, they crossed the Rapidan River. They thought that they could get through the wilderness and into open ground, but Lee reacted and they fought the Battle of Wilderness on May 5th and 6th. To Grant, it was never going to be, you weren't going to turn around. Remember, it's that famous line, if it takes all summer, he's going to.
It takes all summer, yeah.
So on the night of May the 7th, Grant decides to shift south towards Richmond. Maybe they can steal a race and Lee, get between Lee's army and Richmond. But nevertheless, he wanted to get into open ground. So the route that leads him to is Spotsylvania Courthouse, because it's a crossroads. And the main road, Brock Road, led there, and that's where they were heading. And that's how the Confederates on the morning of May the 8th beat them there by a margin of minutes, Laurel Hill, and that gave shape to the battle. Johnson's division of the Second Corps came during the night of May the 8th. They extended the line eastward and ended up on a low ridge, and that's where they halted for the night. And that low ridge became basically the apex of the plateau of the salient or the mule shoe that would be constructed over the next 3 days. Lee did not like it at all. Lee said it was a terrible place because he knew a salient is vulnerable to three sides. But he agreed that if they put artillery in there to back the infantry, it could be defended. And so they rolled in 29 cannon to back the infantry, essentially Robert Rhodes's and Johnson's divisions. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this
that's how they got there, because Grant, and it will be the story of the Overland Campaign. It'll probably be a story of the last 11 months of the war. Grant is not going to turn back, and he doesn't turn back.
Right.
He keeps going, and from the wilderness, the next stop was Spotsylvania.
Right, which brings the armies to Spotsylvania, and certainly this reaching for both armies toward the east, toward the flank, sort of creates this salient in the line, this three-sided part of the line, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But there are two events that are very important to this book that occur prior to May 12th. A lot of events are important to May 12th that occurred prior to it. But the first one I want you to talk about is the change of command in the Union 6th Corps as a result of the death of its commander, John Sedgwick. The 6th Corps is going to play an important part of the battle on May 12th under a new commander. Did you see any important issues involving the 6th Corps because of Sedgwick's death?
Well, Sedgwick, no, he was killed by a sharpshooter on May the 9th. He went out to the front lines, and it's a very famous story where the sharpshooters were firing and he said they couldn't hit an elephant in this distance. And the next thing you know, he was shot under the eye and was killed almost instantly. Horatio Wright is a solid soldier, but he's put into the position already a corps command. And he will be on the battlefield on May the 12th. He'll try to bring forward, and he was ordered to bring forward his divisions and he would do that. But even Hancock, who stayed back, he'll move forward to the Landrum farm, which is just north of the apex of the Muleshoe. But Hancock even loses control of the situation once they're in it. And it's the same for Wright. Wright will keep shuttling men in, but I don't think Sedgwick would have made much difference given the nature of what happens and what transpires. There might have been, if you want to go back, if you're looking at the second item, Emory Upton's attack on May the 10th against Muleshoe, that was all 6th Corps. And Wright proved that. The problem, of course, was Upton was never supported there was a failure of communication because he was supposed to be supported by a division of the Second Corps, Gershom Mott. Gershom Mott leaves a lot to be desired in the first place, and there was no control there, and he never got in. Well, his men went forward a short distance. Confederate artillery and infantry stopped them. So when Upton's 12 regiments broke through in the western face of the Muleshoe, but Wright was back, it was an Upton fight at that point. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to say whether Sedgwick would have made much of a difference, given the nature of what possibly in the 10th, but certainly not, because Wright definitely approved the attack by Emory Upton.
Okay. Well, speaking of Emory Upton, pardon me, I'm glad you brought him up. We have an artifact here in the shop that I want to share with folks, which is one of those, it's not a primary source, it's one of those earlier sources that you can get. It's one of the things that historians work with in order to create these kinds of stories. And we do have Mickey's Life and Letters of General Upton, General Emory Upton. You see a picture of it right there. And here is the volume. It's an early biography of Emory Upton. And Jeff, I think Emory Upton is one of the names that a lot of our viewers today may not know yet. And so could you tell us a little bit about this officer and about his attack on May 10th? Because he's not any other Union general, and this is not any other operation.
No, there wasn't. First of all, he was a colonel at the time. He'd originally been a colonel on 21st New York, and it became known as Upton's Regular because he was committed to the drill and that. He studies war. He's unlike many others. He actually studies war. He almost has a scientific approach to war and tactics and that. Mm-hmm. But he also has that fervor, if you will, as I said in the book, of an evangelist. He wants to, do things. He wants to act. And he had seen in November of 1863, and he had been involved in the attack on Rappahannock Station, where they overran the Confederate defenses on the river and that. And so he realized that linear attacks do not provide depth. And if you're going to attack across ground and you want to break through our defenses, to him, you put it in a column of attack. And so what he asked for was a dozen regiments. He put his brigade, first three regiments in front, and he stacked them in four lines. And as he planned the assault and explained it, they were going to go forward. The first line would break through, and as they broke through the breastworks and that, the first line would funnel left and right down the trenches. The second wave of regiments would follow through and try to expand it. And then the third and fourth would act as reserves and then get into the fight. And basically that's what happened in the evening of May the 10th, 1864. His men broke through Doles's North Carolina brigade. There was a smaller outer salient from the main works, and that's what they broke through. And then they went into the main works, and he actually overran a Confederate battery. But Emory Upton, because of what he did, now his promotion would come May 12th, because his brigade is going to be in the heart of this fight at the Muleshoe also. He will be promoted to brigadier general. And then after the war, he's the one who starts to analyze how the army should function, the tactics and so forth, and becomes renowned for that. Mm-hmm. Devoted his life to this kind of thing. You don't see... They were students, but none of them were quite the student, certainly a colonel or that level, or a war and tactics as Emory Upton was. He's rare, certainly in the Army of the Potomac.
Right. He's definitely a philosopher, a thinker, yes, of military thinking, probably more so than someone like Grant.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Grant too, we were talking about Grant, and when he heard about the initial success of Upton's attack, mm-hmm, and though, please keep in mind, they still did not know, even when Upton attacked, they knew the Confederate defenses were there. They did not know the shape of them. They did not know how many defenders were in those works. They did not know how many cannon supported all those. And but nevertheless, they went ahead with Upton's attack. When Grant heard of his initial success, he thought that maybe we could do something like that on a more massive scale.
Mm-hmm.
And Grant is already, even after the Wilderness, it seems somewhat that he's starting to believe that he might have the Army of Northern Virginia on the ropes a little bit. He certainly will say that in his relationship to his famous attack on June 3rd at Cold Harbor. He believed one more push there, the Army of Northern Virginia. But what he didn't appreciate, obviously, was the Army of Northern Virginia. This was not the Army of Tennessee under Braxton Bragg.
Yeah.
And even Lee's troops, ironically, if you will, were looking forward to this test between Lee and Grant in the spring of '64, because to their view, Grant's going to find out that you're dealing with an entirely different animal in the Army of Northern Virginia, and he was. So, but that Grant uses the basis of Upton's attack to say, why don't we do it on a more massive scale?
Right. So that's May 10th. This brings us to May 12th. And so tell us what's the idea for the May 12th operation? It's like Upton, but times 2 corps.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us what's supposed to happen in those pre-dawn hours.
Well, the attack was given to the Second Corps, Winfield Scott Hancock. Now, the thing with Hancock's physically no longer the Hancock of Gettysburg. It is his wound on July the 3rd that sort of takes some of it does. He's even being treated during this campaign. So physically, some of that's going. Now, he has top flight division commanders in Francis Barlow, John Gibbon, and David Birney. Mott's also the 4th commander. But those 3 they're going to be the main attack, though Mott's division is going to come. Birney and Barlow will be the first ones that hit the works, supported by Gibbon, and then that. In turn, the 6th Corps was ordered to stand by to be ready to enter into it. On the other hand, and I laugh about Ambrose Burnside's with the army, former commanders with the army. Now, since he outranks George Meade, he was made an independent commander, and he would answer directly to Grant. He was supposed to attack simultaneously the eastern face of the Muleshoe as Hancock's divisions attacked what they believed was the apex of the northern end, which in fact it was.
I'm going to go ahead and share a map right here, because this seems like a great time for you to have, for us to, this is a map from later in the afternoon, but it does show
it shows the same thing. And you also see where Laurel Hill is. The 5th Corps under Gouverneur Warren was also supposed to attack at the same time. This is a major offensive. This is what Grant wanted. It wasn't just the Hancock. It was Hancock, Burnside, and in turn Wright and the 6th Corps. These are all the corps of the Army of Army of the Potomac were going to be involved in this attack. Of course, Burnside will attack hours late. Grant even left 2 staff officers with him to make sure they would go forward the right time. They don't. Increasingly, it's seeming that Burnside can't even command a corps anymore. Warren is very hesitant. Warren's attack went forward reluctantly, and really his men had tested Laurel Hill on May the 8th, May the 10th, and now they're asked to do it on May the 12th. Some of the very fine troops in Warren's corps, they went so far, and then they just went to ground. So, but this is an attack by the entire Army of the Potomac as Grant envisioned it.
Right. And then they came right out of the mist, in the pre-dawn mist of May 12th, and they rolled right into that salient. The folks who were looking at the map could see that salient, that bump in the Confederate line, and where Hancock's troops came right out of the mist and over those works. What happened to the Confederates that they were just not ready for an overwhelming attack across that salient?
Well, one thing critically we need to talk about. On May 11th, late in the afternoon of May 11th, Lee received throughout the day, afternoon, there was reports from skirmishers and scouts that the Army of Potomac seemed to be in the move. And then here Burnside was adjusting his troops, getting ready. And Lee's son, Rooney Lee, sent a message to his father. He's a cavalry commander, saying that there seems to be a movement towards Fredericksburg. And Lee interpreted that as what Grant had done on May the 7th. He is going to sidle south towards Richmond. And so to try to either pursue him, interdict him, or attack him en route, Lee makes a major error in judgment. He orders the artillery to be removed from the Muleshoe. Now, remember, he thought it was a terrible position, and the only way it could be defended is if you stack it with artillery. So those 29 cannon, after dark, were removed because there was only a very narrow, rutty road that they could get out of there, so there wouldn't be any speed to it. They were replaced only by 8 cannon, 2 batteries. So during the night then, and the pickets are along there's a Landrum farm just north of the Muleshoe's apex. That's where the Confederate skirmish line was, 3 regiments from William Wicker's brigade of Edward Johnson's division. And they were hearing noises and sounds, and they report back after midnight, they think something's afoot. And so Johnson finally convinces Ewell, try to get the artillery back in here. We need these guns back in here because I think there's going to be an attack. And so what Ewell does is he orders his men to 1 hour before daylight, you need to be in the trenches ready to fight. Now, and most of them were, but it was simply what happens. You're talking, and what Barlow does, and he's the one that hits him first, he stacks his brigades just as Upton stacked his regiment, and he's just so happened to hit Wicker's understrength. Well, Wicker had 6 regiments, 3 of them were in picket duty, the other 3 were in the work, and that's where they hit first. And the mass of the attack, Birney coming, they simply overwhelmed the Confederates. It was that's what happened. There were pockets of resistance. Some of them fought very well. Edward Johnson, but most of them were rounded up. They just simply surrendered. They were captured. He had about 4,000 men, and 20,000 men were coming at him, and they captured about 3,000 of them.
It's an evocative event, and I'm going to share the dust jacket of your book right here with folks, because that tells the story just about as well as 1,000 words, don't you think? Here comes, I presume these are Barlow's men up and over the works.
That's correct. And I was very pleased that the University of North Carolina Press chose that as the cover, because it does clearly show what this was initially all about. And they stormed right over the breastworks, by the way, for folks to know, they were about 4 feet high. They had a firing gap. They put headlogs there, and they dug a trench down about 2 feet deep. So, and then they had steps up, or they built where they could stand on. So they were formidable works. And already they're starting to get, this is going to change the face of war. Spotsylvania is starting to be the change of the face of war, where these entrenchments and breastworks are being built. But this is a good photo, a drawing, painting of it. Yes.
Right. And what I think readers need to know, if they don't know the story of the Battle of Spotsylvania, and if they don't know the story of the Bloody Angle, you can look at this picture, which apparently is somewhere around 5 in the morning in the pre-dawn mist of May 12th, 1864. You can see Union soldiers pouring over the breastworks. You can see Union and Confederate soldiers involved in hand-to-hand combat with bayonets and muskets and all the rest over the breastworks. But the point is, and the point you make so effectively, Jeff, is what you're seeing right now lasts 22 hours. It's not just one event where Union soldiers overrun Confederates. What we're watching right now continues for 22 hours. It's just hard to fathom, Jeff.
Oh, there's no question. And the other thing too, we didn't mention, what the Confederates did was they built traverses behind the main line. They angled them so they could be flank protections. and they were usually three-sided. They even but we don't know how many there were. All traces of them are gone, but there were many of them. And it also becomes not only a fight for the original breastwork. That's how the soldiers would come to determine it, the differences. These would be the original breastworks and the original trench, if you will, that they were fighting for. They also fought during these hours for the traverses. Some federal soldiers were never quite cleared out until very end, out of the inside of the mule suit. They were in there for hours and fighting from traverse to traverse between them. And some of the soldiers said, we just clawed our way up the rise to the main works and fight from traverse to traverse. So it was more hand-to-hand combat even there. And then you don't know, it's hard to explain this, and you wonder why, because you're never in that. But men actually, both sides stood on top of the breastworks and fired down into the trenches or on the opposite sides as their comrades fed them loaded rifles up. And almost all of them were shot down. One of them survived amazingly. He was a Mainer, and he ended up with the Medal of Honor, which he certainly deserved to get it. They said that he may have fired 100 rounds of ammunition standing there, and it's amazing he wasn't hit. Many of them. So this is the nature of it. And men, numbers of soldiers said this is the first bayonet fight we were really ever in.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have to use a bayonet, you don't want to be that close to your enemy. And they had no choice. They were that close.
Right. Hey, Jeff, we're going to take a minute here. We're about halfway through our discussion. And I want to acknowledge some of the folks that are watching. We're not in here alone, Jeff. Jeff Bowen is watching from Winter Haven, Florida. Our friend Bill Shepard is up there in Lake Bluff, Illinois. Michael Hardy from Michigan. Hello, Michael. Good to see you. Doug Ashton is watching from Canada, and Dave Bradley from the UK is watching. Jeff, this is an international book signing event. We have somebody joining us from the UK. Now, folks who are watching on Facebook, if you have a question for Jeff Wert, go ahead and put it in the comments of the Facebook comments section. And I'll check in again a couple of times during the course of this conversation, because if you want to ask the questions, you're welcome to do it. I have a couple pages of questions here. I could go all night. But if you have questions for Jeff, if you want to learn about the Battle of Spotsylvania, if you want to learn about this uniquely horrible chapter of Civil War combat, leave your questions in the comments. I'll check back with you and we'll share them with Jeff. Now, Jeff, you do bring in, here's sort of the emotional or visceral part of this story. These soldiers fought for 22 hours in hand-to-hand situation. It never worked like they'd never seen anything like. Guys who fought for 3 years had never seen anything like that. What did you find in the letters, diaries, and memoirs of the soldiers, the bottom-up part, where they found that this was a uniquely horrifying event?
Well, one letter comes to mind. Well, it's actually in the history of the South Carolina Brigade. James Caldwell, Lieutenant of 1st South Carolina, he said it became a matter of facing death. It wasn't a matter of running away from death. You had no choice. It became the reality for all of them. And those words are echoed time and time again. I mean, one soldier says, well, he writes home to his wife and says, well, the enemy were just opposite me and they were on the other side of the breastworks, or we were fighting from traverse to traverse, and the Yankees were in one traverse and we were in the other traverse, and they were that close to each other. And it's time again. But what really, more than anything, it stupefied them. It stunned them. The carnage the whole place seemed to be awash in carnage. And they remember, I mean, they talk about the blood and the water in the trenches, and it's a foot deep. And they're pulling men out that have been wounded, trying to save their life before they're drowned, because dead bodies are falling on top of these men. It's the graphicness of it there in all the manuscripts, certainly, and even newspaper account, and even later after war. But as I said, my last chapter is titled Such a Place. And I got that from them because there was no other such a place to these top flight, excellent veteran soldiers as the mule shoe was on May the 12th, 1864. There was nothing in their collective experience that compared to that. And they let you know that letter after letter, diary entry after diary entry, memoir, regimental history. It's there. And I left them tell it.
Mm-hmm.
That I could not do it anywhere near as well as they could. You hope you can convey that emotion and that feeling, as you said, the bristleness of it. You hope you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times I just let them tell it. And,
Right.
And I was already, because they deserved to tell it, is the way I looked at it.
Right. And they certainly told it in a vivid language that you don't always see with the descriptions of other battles.
Right.
Spotsylvania, specifically the mule shoe fight, was just different.
It was.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got immersed myself in this, and to me, usually it takes me probably 3 years to do a book between the research and that, and you have to take time, and I'm a slow writer, but you need to get in. And once I got into that more and more as I'm researching it, I realized this is the story. As I said, you can make an argument, and I know there's our history and other world histories are terrible days.
Mm-hmm.
This ranks near the top for American military history as a terrible day, certainly for the men who were there. That's it. For those who were stuck in that nightmare, and the thing is, as I said before, it was ceaseless. There was only one pause briefly in late afternoon. And remember, it fought in a rainstorm. The rain would abate, and then some thunderstorms rolled in late in the afternoon, early evening to make the conditions even more miserable. Men fought without food. If it didn't have water in their canteens, they were one. I remember one Stonewall Brigade member who was knocked unconscious. Now they're part of Edward Johnson's division. They're overrun. He woke up and he was so thirsty he crawled to a mud puddle, realized it was muddy and with blood in it, and it didn't matter. He drank because he needed to drink. And there's story after story. There's a father who sees his son shot. He goes over to him, South Carolina, Mississippi. And as he's tending over his son, he's shot and killed. And the other thing too about it is many of these men, they remember all these incidences, because it was so graphically to them at the time. And so they end up relating these instances that for an historian is just a wonderful thing to come across and to learn from.
Yeah, exactly. They were more, they seem to have been affected more by it, and they tell us that.
Yes.
They're good writers, and
yes, they are. And
even people that aren't proficient writers are vivid writers.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Now, I'm going to step back just a minute to a little of the bigger picture here of military history and the decisions of the generals. But so for this one, ultimately, for the folks at home, spoiler alert, the Union attack does not work as planned, and the General Lee's troops counterattack, and they more or less restore the line, restore the stability. So in the end, we can say one side, it was a stalemate, one side won or the others. But one thing you do say, page 186, you say the ghosts of the Army of the Potomac's past hovered over the battlefield as certainly as the failures of its senior leadership. You're talking about the ghosts that haunt the Army of the Potomac. What ghosts were those that were hovering over this army?
Well, it's a past. It's a past under McClellan. It's the idea that you need to be cautious. Instead of fighting to win, you fight perhaps not to lose. You question things. Gouverneur Warren, of course, Gouverneur Warren's instincts were right. I mean, Laurel Hill I mean, Laurel Hill was just that slope. They had never had a chance in Laurel Hill. And then he was reluctant to do it. Otherwise, it's the organization, it's the communication, things break down. But there's not what Grant wanted. Grant simply wanted to, he had that killer instinct, if you want to use that phrase.
Yeah.
What I do, and he even says this, and it becomes true, but he had to exercise, he had to make them understand that you have to be aggressive. You have to take the fight to them. And they hadn't. The members of the Army of Potomac and me, I wrote about them. All they ever wanted was a fair fight on a fair field. Mm-hmm. And they never seemed to get that for 2 years of the war. Gettysburg, they got in that. It was a fair fight on a fair field. They had leadership that reacted, and the leadership was worthy of the men in the ranks. We're going to go back now. Eventually, I hate to say this, but the Army of Potomac that was at Antietam, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, it's destroyed in the overland campaign. Mm-hmm. It really is. As we think of those men, so many people study at Gettysburg, they're going. They're going to be going. I mean, they have 60,000 casualties. That's more than Antietam, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg combined. So, but what I taught by those are the things that idea. I remember I got a quote after Gettysburg. A surgeon said, "We are an army of lions commanded by jackasses." Well, the irony of that was at Gettysburg, there were fewer jackasses than there had been prior to that. Yeah. And, but the army was going on. But that's what Grant had to exercise. And it took him time. And and also the command situation was not good. Grant's the general in chief of the Army. Meade's the Army commander. Okay. Meade has to respond to Grant. Grant's with him. The staffs didn't get along real well. Eventually, Grant just takes complete control of the Army. And to George Meade's credit, he becomes, if you want to use that, a very good soldier in the sense he becomes the Army chief of staff. He does what Grant wants him to do. But as I said earlier, what Grant would say later, he said, "I grabbed the Army of Northern Virginia by the throat." And that's what he did. And for 11 months, he choked it to death. And that was the thing. And this is, as I said, when he moved from the wilderness to Spotsylvania, that was just a step in that. What's interesting, for people who don't know that, on the night of May 7th in the wilderness, and I think it's a defining moment for the Army, Grant and Meade come down the Orange Turnpike, and they come to the intersection of the Brock Road. And soldiers are there. The woods are somewhat on fire. There's that amber glow. And if he turns left, they're going back across the Rappahannock, which has been the history of the Army up until that time. You're beaten, you retreat. Grant turned right, and the soldiers cheered him.
Right.
They've been waiting for somebody to turn right.
Right. That's exercising a ghost.
Yes. Yes, in part it is. This is a new man in charge, and we're going, because they understood something. They knew it's going to be a bloody days ahead. But if things go well, that road leads to home and victory, and that's all they cared about.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, as we said, the attack does lead from initial success, as we see here, to this horrible long stalemate, and then eventually what one might call a Confederate, if not a Confederate victory, a Union failure, in that the attack did not work out. And I think one of the best observations that you find in here comes from the Confederate artillerist, E.P. Alexander, who, in looking back and analyzing what went wrong for the Federals, says of the Union breakthrough, an excessive force may paralyze its own efforts. What do you think Alexander meant by that from what happened to Grant's attack?
Well, that's what happened was, and what he means by that, that's what did happen. And Francis Barlow would write about it too. Once the Union Second Corps overwhelmed Edward Johnson's division and started to penetrate deeper into the salient. Now they went along down the trenches to clear the trenches out. Now some of the Confederate units on the western and eastern face, they were able to stem that a little bit, but a mass of disorganized, and that's a key element there. They were so flush with victory. One man said they were insane with victory. The Second Corps, they started to penetrate deeper into the salient. At the base of the salient, between the McCool house, which was in the heart of this whole, it was McCool farm, McCool family, Neil McCool's farm, Woodshaw farm, the main part of the salient was on, and down to the Edgar Harrison, they had built a reserve line of works. And that's where what happened is John Gordon, who, and Lee had to be, it was one of those things where you have a man who is going to start to truly rise as a combat officer, John Gordon. He is there with two of his brigades, and they will meet him. But there was no control over their men. So they come as a mass of men where Confederates were in control. The two brigades were there waiting, and they blunt the assault. And that's what it became so massive and overwhelming that the officers, as Alexander meant, they lost control of it, and they did. Once the counterattacks come, and you still have this disorganized mass, and they're still outnumbered, the Confederates, because really it comes down to altogether there's about 17,000 Confederates in this fight, and there's about 38,000 Federals in this fight. But in those initial phases, that first hour, 2 hours, many of the Union, there's loss of organization and control by their officers.
Yeah.
And that's what Alexander meant.
Right.
And
hey, we've had a few of our customers who are watching have some questions they want to ask Jeff. So let's take a few minutes and let them take the lead here. We only have a few minutes left, but I know they want fulsome answers, but just do the best you can with this. Now, Bill Shepard wants to know, could Mr. Wert tell us about the many primary sources he used, where he found them, how he used them in the book, and what surprised him in the letters and diaries? Thank you, Bill.
Well, they're the traditional sources. I fortunately, where I live in central Pennsylvania, I'm about an hour and a half from the Army Heritage Education Center, which is arguably the largest collection of Civil War letters and diaries in the country. But I have all you'll see in University of North Carolina, the historical societies, North and South. There were some obscure places I came across in libraries and that, in the college libraries, university libraries. The other thing that was really a treasure trove for me were the newspapers. And you can do a lot more today with that. I think I've been doing this for so long, and I don't mean that. What surprised me is what we've been talking about. Their words, the horror of the place. That's what surprised me. You know how they deal with. You write about Gettysburg, or you write about Fredericksburg. Soldiers say a lot of the same things, and that's what their experiences are. But in this case, that's going to change, and that's what surprised me more than anything.
Okay, and then we do have I want to make sure to get to Dave Bradley's question, because I get such a kick out of getting questions from someone who's watching us live from the United Kingdom. So Dave Bradley wants to know, would you agree that Grant was the first Union commander who really understood that warfare was all about, and what warfare was all about, and what was required to defeat a very determined and brave enemy?
Well, that's probably a fair observation. I don't know if he's at his level. Yes, I mean, there was nobody like Grant. I mean, George Thomas, who's often overlooked, but just focusing on Grant. Yes, as I said, Grant was I'll use this as a warrior. You're going to take the war to your enemy. I mean, and he could be a brilliant strategist too. And the Vicksburg campaign shows that. It's one of the our brilliant strategic. But Grant, as we viscerally, yes, he understood that. I agree with that. There was nobody like Grant, and again, there was nobody like Lee.
Yeah.
It's just the fact. And
right.
Grant was blessed with the legions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was all Lincoln ever needed was somebody who would, if you will, unsheathe the sword of Union might, the resources, the economy, and the manpower. And Grant,
right. You wrote a book about that.
yeah, yes.
But okay, so thank you everybody that's watching and everybody that's asked questions live. We just have a few minutes left, and I want to bring us back. Jeff, to where you start this book, and it's something that's very important to me, and people that watch these programs a lot know that I am one of the people that wants to go to the battlefield and be there and visit it. And you decided to write this book because you were at Spotsylvania. There's something different about the Spotsylvania battlefield than other national battlefield parks. Something inspired you to want to write this story. How is this battlefield different to us when we stand on it?
Well, first of all, I imagine many of your viewers have gone to Gettysburg and some of the other, but Gettysburg is a prime example. There's monuments. You can bump a monument every 10 feet in some cases.
Yeah.
And that, I think it was over 1,300 tabs. You go to Muleshoe, there's hardly any. Nobody came back. There's a few, a couple more recent ones. There was one Union one that we put in, I think 1912 or something, 14 maybe. And the same thing with that. Of course, the problem with any of those down around Fredericksburg is that, unfortunately, Fredericksburg has become a bedroom community of Washington, D.C. So there's so many. There's a wonderful organization saving it, but Spotsylvania is different in that sense. And I think there's not a lot of these monuments and stuff to them. The Laurel Hill's there. You can't. You can see that slope and you can visit that. But if you're particularly going to the Muleshoe, you stand in what has remained eroded away of the works, and you can see the outline of them. And they have signs up. The Park Services signs up and that. But as far as being commemorated by veterans and regiments, that you're not going to find that.
Right. Now, the original battlefield stompers of Spotsylvania, however, were the veterans. They came back. You tell the story that Nelson Miles visited the battlefield in 1865 while marching his brigade back to Washington. So some of the original battlefield tourists were the soldiers still in the service. And you found a wonderful, compelling quote, as far as I'm concerned. One of the veterans said that this is a strange and dreary battlefield.
Yeah.
And of course, people got blown to bits at Gettysburg, but Gettysburg and Spotsylvania are different. And this guy says, yeah, this is a strange and dreary battlefield. How does the story of what happened there affect your visit when you're standing there at the Muleshoe?
Well, yeah, you have to, you come there, and I'll be honest with you, when I was standing there, it's the same way for me when I would stand, maybe when I wrote about Culp's Hill, and it's different, but yet you knew this was different. I've gone back to it numbers of times since, as I was doing my research. You get deeper, and there is that sense. I mean, it's one of Joshua Chamberlain's vision places of souls, as he would put them, and it clearly is. And there is this sense, I agree, and I think what made it, in his reference and all these, you think about the May 12th, the rain, the fog, and the depth of and the horrors of it, and it is such a if you come there with those eyes and you think about those things, it's stark. It is, and I'll be honest with you too. If you walk across those fields towards Cemetery Ridge with the Union, Pickett's men and Pettigrew's men, there's also a same sense of that hauntiness about it, because what you're facing. But Spotsylvania, at least the Muleshoe and that, and if you have any knowledge of it, it is different because
Yeah.
the heart, we keep saying the word, but that's the word they used.
Yeah. The heart of hell. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, something I didn't know, we don't have time to talk about the whole battlefield. I didn't know you could drive over to that Laurel Hill place. And can you get back in there and see, clearly, I guess you can see all of that, huh?
Yes, and there's a nice monument to the spot where Sedgwick was killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes.
Oh, definitely, folks, go to the Spotsylvania battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to Fredericksburg, you have 4 battlefields right there.
Yeah.
You know, so you can make a good day, 2 days probably. And they're doing their best. There's an organization trying to save some, other than the Park Service.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they're trying to save it, and those things. And but yes, the McCool House is only a marker there, same as the Harrison Place. Landrum, that same thing. They have it marked where they are. Brown Place. Those are the key to having, because the Brown Place. Well, what's that? Well, that's where the Second Corps staged before their attack.
Right.
12. And then, but the McCool House was right in the heart. Well, that was, as I said, it was their farm that formed the heart of the mule shoe.
Right.
Those, the places where they were are there. None of them stand anymore.
Okay. All right, Jeff, we're about out of time. Is there anything else you'd like if there's anything else you'd like people to know about the heart of hell that would make this a compelling read?
I think if you really want to learn about the common soldiers and what they experienced, there is, in the Civil War, there's no other place like this on this day. There's simply not. You say, well, how can that be? Well, just one minor thing. Between July 3rd, 1863 and Appomattox, this is the bloodiest day in the war in the East. There's no, even June 3rd, it's
right.
Cold Harbor is not this bloody. 17,500 casualties are inflicted here in this one day. But that's it. You'll find within the book words that just they ring down through time. Are compelling, and the soldiers, they're going to tell the story. And I was privileged, I would put it that way, to be able to tell that story.
Yeah.
And use their words.
Yeah. And a story that needs to be told. It's not just the Battle of Spotsylvania. There's a reason why this story needs to be told, and told by the soldiers.
Yes. Correct.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Jeff.
Invitation.
Oh, of course. Of course. I'm going to take just a second to tell folks about upcoming events, and then we'll come in and we'll sign off. But for anybody watching, coming up on A House Divided, live streamed book signing, book selling programs just like this one. The next event is Thursday, September 1st at 3:30 in the afternoon. David Kent will join us with Lincoln, the Fire of Genius. And then on Thursday, September 22nd at 3:30 in the afternoon, Jan Jacoby will return with a lovely little volume for young readers, Lincoln in Springfield. It's the second of what will be a series of books for young readers by Jan Jacoby. That will be on Thursday, September 22nd. On Monday, October 24th, glad to announce it right here. Monday, October 24th at 3:30, John Meacham will join us again. And his new book is a Lincoln biography, And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle. Hey, Jeff, before we sign off, is there anything you're working on right now that you'd like folks to know about?
No, not really. I'm going back. I'm just doing some articles, want to do some articles. I tend not to write articles when I'm working on a book.
Yeah.
It takes me away from it. But no, you need a good idea, and I'm trying to find a good idea.
Well, you've had a lot of good ideas in your career, Jeff.
Yeah, but it's, as I said, I have to find a story that I want to immerse myself in for 2 or 3 years, certainly.
Yeah.
And, I want to take some time off a little bit too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, Jeff. We've been doing this for a long time, and you've always been an author that we've wanted to get on our live show. And I'm glad we got this opportunity to get you virtually into Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. to talk about the heart of hell. Now, for those of you at home, or for those of you who are watching this on our YouTube video later, you can order the book at the link in the comments. It's the link below the video on YouTube. Join us, come and look at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop at alincolnbookshop.com. And again, thank you everybody out there, and we will see you next time on A House Divided.